let's take a look at some of your questions and see what you've said, what you have. Um, can you just describe Christ's standard and give us scriptural support? Well, I just was giving you, and that was before that question came in before I looked at the Mark 7 text. So when we look at that Mark 7 text, it's pretty overwhelming that what we need is a heart transplant. And so when we think about John's gospel, there are just certain texts that always come to mind as being fundamental for to us to grasp. And the one of them is the amazing idea that the infinite word, the infinite and perfect one, the infinite word of God became the incarnate word. And so he was in the beginning of God with God. So he is the living God. And then we see this very living God then actually in verse 14 becomes incarnate, his glory is in him, and it was manifest in him, full of grace and truth. And then he says, though, that as well, the true light comes into the world and lightens every man. He was in the world was made through him. The world did not know him. He came to his own people. Those who were his own people did not receive him. So as we see this in Romans 9, 10, 11, especially chapter 11, where Jesus is his rejection by the Jews, by his own people as a whole, it was a generational rejection where he made his appearance and he was the response was one against him. And ultimately, then that rejection made it possible for God to extend it to the Gentile as well. Because before, remember, he said, I've only come for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So it is by their own rejection, which was prophesied by the scriptures in the prophets, that their Messiah, the suffering servant, would come and that he would be rejected. All these things come to pass to reveal once again God's greatness, because suddenly now it's become possible for us to go into all the world and not just to the house of Israel, so that their rejection became the blessing to us, Romans 11 tells us, but ultimately then they will come back into that fold and all Israel will be saved in Romans 11. So all these mysteries, these wonders that God is at work, the depths of the riches, both of his purposes and his plan that transcend our imagination and involve things I could never have thought of. Even the use of allowing of sin to take place, because we know that in order for there to be relationship, there needs to be the risk of rejection, there has to be a responsibility. We can't. So all these things come together, and we see a unique portrait and a unique position. So again, this concept of him receiving in the world then, and realizing then that as many as received him, so that he is saying that effectively then to receive him, to them he gave the right to become, even to those, and it's an apposition, which means and that is those who believe in his name. So those who believe in his name, and to believe him is receiving him, to transfer my trust from my own works to him. That's what makes all the difference in the world. So the whole point there in Romans 3:23, all of sin, we all fall short, is just underscoring what Jesus has said as well. And so this condemnation, that's why Romans begins with condemnation, but then it goes to justification, because that's the condition we were in. And that's why we start off with the God's position and then our condition, God's provision to overcome our condemnation. This gospel story that we hear again and again. Every time you hear it, though, if you're really thinking, it's more profound, more mysterious, more wonderful. For him to become incarnate, not to serve, but to be served, but to serve, to come to give his life as a ransom, to come to take on our death so that we might have his life. All these things stand unique, and I know no other savior, as I say. So these are important themes. Another question that has come in is the difference between the theological and sociological view of sin. And so there's the sin against God and sin against others is almost what we're looking at here. So from a theological standpoint, all unrighteousness is sin, and we all fall short of the glory of God. There are different degrees, and there's of evil. And I talk about this in my book, Conform to His Image. When I speak about the nature of evil, as being manifold. And there's let me see if I can find it. I may have a thing that I have here on this. Let me see if I can find it for you here. Okay, here. No, I've just got the world of flesh and the devil, the inside out process there that I've called there. But the whole idea of evil being a parasite on the good, and that the nature of evil is that it is something that is a diminishment. It is a minimization of a good thing. I think of it as an ontological parasite. It derives its identity. It derives itself from an actual good that already existed. So when I think about this idea, I'm looking at the way I put it recently. See if I can find it for you here. Yeah, as I put it here, our flesh signatures shadow our spirit signatures. The biblical metaphor is darkness rather than shadow. Darkness and cold are not things, they are the absence of light and heat. Similarly, evil is an ontological parasite. That is to say, it doesn't have any being of itself. It consists of distorted goods and disordered loves. And that's a very important thing for you to think about, that it is distorted goods. These are good things that are being used in the wrong manner, in the wrong way, in the wrong for the wrong purposes, in the wrong amount. And so this is the way it is. Satan can't, C.S. Lewis describes it brilliantly in the screw tape letters. Our Father below cannot create any new pleasures. Speaking of the enemy, all he can do is to take the pleasures that the enemy, namely God, has made and cause the humans to use them in the wrong amounts or for the wrong purposes. And so it's a powerful thing to realize that evil, it requires an absolute good for it to even have its own existence. In a fallen world, evil can only become an entity on the highest level of sentience, personal agency that fully bears but distorts the imago Dei. So speaking about these ideas, then I'm saying that there are different forms of evil, but it's manifested in three ways. It's manifested in personal evil, it's social evil, and then third, it's structural evil. So if we were to look at it from that standpoint, let me just summon up a new project for you here. Get it for you here. And so let me just give you here. So if we think about it's personal evil, first of all, that's what we're talking about in our conversation here. We're talking about all unrighteousness is sin, and anything that falls short of the glory of God. And so when we think about that kind of idea, that's personal evil. We fall short of the glory of God. We hit the wrong target. There are various verses that are used. So sometimes it means to miss the mark. Sometimes it means to hit the wrong mark. There are different metaphors that are used of it. But there's another form of evil that I think is manifest, and that would be a social evil. And I would see it in this manner here. Social evils can be seen as injustices, whether it's the treating of people in a way that is indignant, that destroys all their dignity, the abuse of women, the abuse of children, any number of things that are done to injure and harm and hurt other people. But then there's a third type of thing, because the social evil then becomes more rigid. It becomes structural evil. And I talk about this again, as I say, in Conformed to His Image, a little bit in the chapter on in the section on warfare spirituality. But there are forms of structural evils that become manifest as well. Slavery and then various kinds of one of the structure, widow burning was a common thing in India until not long ago, just a few decades ago. when the husband died, and things of this nature, all kinds of things that injure. A structural evil would be the caste system, would be another example of where it's actually hardwired into the society, into the structure of society in a way that then manifests itself. So there's a sense of our right and wrong relationships with God. And it's intriguing to me that in spite of the fact that we fall short of the glory of God, and that we, as personal entities, then have dignity and the depravity, this strange pull. At the same time, it's interesting that other people make it possible to become worse than we are, and other people also amplify the possibility for righteousness, and that's worth noting. That is to say, when we are by ourselves, there's some things we can do, of course, that are wrong. But when we are with others who have a collective intention, that amplifies the malevolence, and it actually diminishes sometimes certain barriers or inhibitions. So that becomes a social evil that actually amplifies itself in gang behaviors and so forth, even the rituals to become a member of a gang, which often mean bloodlust. And so this is more than a person would normally do, unless they're really a psychopath and sociopath, but more than a person would normally do by themselves. There are exceptions. But essentially, people can amplify ill in our lives. At the same time, I argue that people can amplify good in our lives. And that's why there's a need for the community of believers. So that when we are in a body of believers and part of a network system where people care for one another and look out for each other, now you have a social and a structural component. So the church could become a more and more of a collective good for humanity. Structural goods that have come out of Christianity, of course, are educational systems and eleemosynary systems and hospitals and all kinds of good deeds and charity, missionary endeavor as well as advances in sub-created beauty, in art and music and literature and architecture, and more recently, of course, in film. But there are some goods that can be done in communal contexts which amplify a good in that sense. So there are structural evils, and the church then, in my mind, is an exemplar of how we can collectively enhance each other's desire for righteousness. When I think about Hebrews chapter 3, that comes to my mind. Because here in Hebrews chapter 3, he speaks about how you, let me see, take care of it. Yeah, but encourage, verse 13 in particular. But he says, take care. I'm on the wrong one. Sorry. Take care, brethren, that there not be in any one of you an evil, unbelieving heart that falls away from the living God. And so don't let that happen, because that can. But what does he now say as a warranted solution? Encourage one another day after day, as long as it is still called today, so that none of you will be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. Now, that's a very profound text, because it invites us to see that by ourselves we cannot thrive. Yes, we come to faith as individuals, but we grow in community. That's why I began Conformed to His Image with relational spirituality, but then I end it and deliberately bookend the thing by having the 12th facet, a corporate spirituality, because now you see good and evil, if they can be amplified by the collective, then we want to see that the church, again, is that good thing, that it can be distorted by wrong collectives. But it becomes a powerful understanding. So I hope this is helpful for us in seeing what I mean about these three forms of evil. Let me see there's another question here. So let me see, is this today's thing? Yeah, okay. So the problem of comparing with give you a good example of that. So let me go back to back to the question of good works and the comparison here. So a person may compare himself with another person, and think, if I'm better than most people. Again, they keep having this delusion that God is grading on a curve. And they figure that, and this is fascinating to me. If you ask the average person, it's a really fascinating thing to ask yourself, because um, a friend of mine was just describing a little discourse he had with a person that he'd met for the first time. And in their conversation, he asked him the question that, what do you think? I don't remember exactly how he put it, but it was about the about how long you got to live. What's going to happen after you die, do you think? I mean, so we're all kind of mortal, and we wrestle with that stuff. So the guy said, "What's going to happen?" So he's forcing him to think about that question, and invariably, the average person on the street is going to have some kind of idea that God grades in a curve, and that basically in the curve and the line fascinates me because it's always just below them, as I said before. It's always just the rung below them. It's amazing where we base this on. So we're asking God to welcome evil. Suppose that even if you had 51% good and you only had 49% evil. So your good outweighs the evil. So you're asking God to endure the presence of 49% evil. Or get over there. Don't let me see you. I mean, it's absurd, the kind of God that would do that. See, it's bringing the holiness of God down to our level, or amplifying our delusion of how good we are by comparing ourselves with other people and supposing we're better than most. And of course, this is why I said before that the basis of comparison is thin when you're using the wrong metric. It's not to be horizontal, but it's vertical. And that is why the vertical metric is that which really breaks the curve. Christ, as you could say, is the curve breaker. But the beauty is that the one who breaks the curve is the one who actually broke the curse of sin as well. And so he takes the sin on himself. And this is why Romans text is so beautiful, because he says, therefore, he could be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. Because God, and I love to use this phrase, I've used it since I first heard it years ago when I was in Dallas Theological Seminary. I was in a course on John, I think, or it was systematic theology, I think. It was S. Lewis Johnson, and he said that the righteousness that God requires is that righteousness which his righteousness requires him to require. And I still remember his thick Charleston accent as he described that. And it just built into me an understanding that's exactly right. God cannot break a grade on a curve. He cannot be just 99 and 44 100% good and have that 0.6% 6 allow that to somehow be in there. It's crazy. So the idea here is that his perfection is such that he cannot abide the presence. If he is light, in him there is no darkness at all, and he cannot abide evil, because evil I define as anything that's contrary to the character of God. It's the simplest definition I know of evil or sin. Whatever falls short or is contrary to the character of God. There's the idea of it's uh, Cornelius Plantinga, whatever became of sin. He was talking about the concept of sin itself, and it was a culpable disturbance of shalom, as he put it, when he talked about the nature of sin. A culpable disturbance of shalom. You're culpable. It's not, you just can't blame it on others. You're an agent. Otherwise, if you had no power, no agency, you would be again a programmed non-entity that would have no value. So as an agent, then you are culpable because you fall short of the glory of God. And so this harsh realization that I bring nothing to the table is the real issue, because it offends our pride, I think, a lot. And some people would then want somehow to believe that churchianity, that religion without Christ is possible. So they suppose that by doing these things, by going to church, and so you have to ask them, well, what's your basis for thinking that you might go to heaven? So you have, if you're going to die, what would happen to you? And if he says, I guess I'm going to go to heaven, then you ask the obvious question, what makes you think that? And then you begin to add it up. And again, what we have here is an inadequate vision of the one who pursues us. In him, there is no darkness at all. So for Jesus to take on that cost, it required an infinite purchase price. This is why it required the God-man, the one who knew no sin, the one who was not in the line of Adam's, in the male line, but did where it was the sin was inherited from generation to generation. In him there is no sin, and yet he's fully human through Mary. So we have this deep and profound miracle, the perfect God-man. So that God comes down to us, reaches down. Well, why would he do that? Especially when we were his enemies, when we were at enmity with God. That's when he woos us and pursues us. It was not while we were righteous. So a text that comes to my mind is Romans chapter 5. And so it's really the reach of God that becomes so profound. So this having been justified by faith, which means to be declared righteous. And you're not declared righteous by works, and Paul develops that theme. We have peace with God. So you can have, now that you have shalom, you have peace with him. So now we are in the right position with him. And we exult in hope of the glory of God. He also talked about exulting in tribulation, knowing not what it can produce. But then he says, while we were still helpless at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. For one will hardly die for a righteous man, though perhaps for the good man, someone would dare even to die. But God demonstrates his own love toward us, and that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. So much more, having now been justified by his blood, we will be saved from the wrath of God concerned through him. Now here it gets even clearer in verse 10. If while we were enemies, and that's the point, we were not neutral toward God, but we were at enmity with him because we wanted the world to be about us and not about him. We wanted to be egocentric, anthropocentric, not theocentric, not Christocentric. And because of that, our natural enmity with God would be, my will be done, not your will be done. And so, as enemies to his grace, now having been brought near, reconciled, being changed, we shall be saved by his life. This wonderful metaphors of salvation. That's the word salvation is a wonderful gem with many metaphorical facets. But now we exult through whom we've now received this reconciliation, reconciliation being one of those metaphors, one of those facets of salvation, which means that now God has been reconciled with us because he, Christ, the reconciler of us, he made him who knew no sin to be sin on our behalf, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. So now he calls us to be reconcilers. Because we've been reconciled, we've been changed with God. Now you can be changed with your neighbor. So it goes back to that question that my friend asked him then. So what makes you think you're going to go to heaven? And invariably, and the average person on the street, even people who go to church, will suppose it's their church attendance or their righteousness or their deeds or their prayers or whatever. And they fail to grasp that the deeper issues of the heart, as we saw in Matthew chapter 7, even sins of pride and foolishness and covetousness, even those things, they all condemn. And it's like the image of a chain of 613 connectors. So we have these 613 links, and it's this description of the positive and negative laws as often have been listed. How many of those links need to be broken for you to fall off the cliff when you're suspended at the end of that chain? You know the obvious answer. So if the nature of sin then is that it separates us from the love of God. Sin is death. So God takes death upon himself, and then the death of death, he takes on that which was not his own, so that we could have that which was not ours. Amazing thoughts. And so when we look at these things, we've now been reconciled. We've now been brought near by the blood of Christ. And so this is the other thing, though. It amazes me that people can go to churches, even recite the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed, and have religion without Christ. So it's profession versus possession is always the fundamental distinction that we make. Is profession versus possession. In the book that I've talked to you before about Jesus in his own words, we talk about this, especially because of in the last portion, confessing faith in Jesus. And what does that look like? And so this is a helpful little booklet. It's really designed as a gospel tract, is really what it is. And it's used for this purpose and its intention. So there's a lot of white space, as you can see here. His teachings on the end times, chapter 12. We have the illustrations by my friend Stephen Krotz, brilliant work that he does. And then at the end of this, and then the red words are Jesus words, and the black is just all it does is clarify and contextualize without any jargon or Christianese. So it's really created for a person who may not know Jesus at all, but rather something designed to actually draw them to him. So even before this chapter here, the one before it is his offer of salvation. So it walks you through that door and helps you see. And this has not only been very valuable in people's coming to faith in Jesus, because you just get to hear his unadulterated words, which is a lovely thing. And I realized I made the mistake. I've been thinking you were watching this the entire time. I apologize for that. I was just, I can't believe it. But I was talking about this artwork by my friend Stephen Krotz. Apologize for that. Got to be more pay better attention to that. But then his this artwork that he has on the judgment, and so you see the light and the fire. It's a powerful picture. And his teachings on the end time. So again, it's written with the non-believer in mind to give them a straight up exposure to Christ, and that's a pretty powerful thing to have. I'd rather them have that than just even a New Testament, because it really brings in the key issues of who he was and who he claimed to be. Then we have this little section about for confessing faith in Jesus. And so, and this can be used not only for non-believers, and gives you the power to do the work of an evangelist. I always carry some with me. And whenever I'm led to, I give them away. But at the same time, it is something that can be used as a little study for new believers. As we've seen, not to accept Jesus is effectively the same as rejecting him. And that's catastrophic. So we have this simple prayer, and then after that, a follow-up, continuing the journey. So I mention that only because I think it's very important to have some kind of a vehicle or means by which we can convey this good news. Because when a person needs to come to the realization that they fall short of the glory of God and they cannot make it on themselves, and that's when you transfer your trust from yourself to him. And it's always been this, it's always been so. It's a transfer of trust. Mine, I had an intellectual belief in Jesus for about, I remember the official time, and it was about 8 years. And so I was 14 years old when I came to that profession of faith. And I even marked it down in my Bible. I still remember it, so the exact date and so forth. But it was really it was just hearing a guy pray a prayer, and I just listened in. I believed it, and it was my intellectual acceptance, but it was not a reception of a person. And that required a longer process in my journey. By the grace of God, he wooed and pursued and eventually brought me to that relationship where finally I realized that I cannot sustain this as I've been. I'm trying to bracket him, not to receive him or reject him. And that's what it comes down to. That I tell people that you need to make an informed decision as to whether you receive him or reject him, but you will do one or the other at the end of the day, because not to receive him is to reject him. So at the end of the day, you don't have an option. You have to choose to receive or reject, and not to just be neutral. That's not an option that's available for us at all. So that's important for us to see. At any rate, and there's another question: can we do anything for Jesus Christ? I tell people that stop trying to do things for him and allow him to do things in you and through you as you. That's a very important distinction there. So it's one of the spiritual renewal cards that I have. And these spiritual renewal cards, one of them is, let me find it for you here. I think I have it earlier. Yeah, I do. It's this little special card here. Jesus Christ gave his life for you. That's his crucifixion. That's your salvation, so that he could give his life to you. That's your co-crucifixion that Romans 6 describes. So we died and we were buried with him. So we are so identified with him because you cannot imitate him unless you've been identified with him. So he could live his life through you as you. So I'm saying when you're abiding in Christ, you're not doing it for him. You're allowing his life to manifest itself in you and through you, but through the distinct personality you've been granted. So instead of doing things for Jesus, you're like actually doing things as a result of knowing him, you see. So you're doing them as him. And so you become, the word becomes flesh. So he wants to give his life in you and through you as you. So then you're allowing him to do it through you rather than you do things for him. There's a difference that I'm trying to distinguish. But I don't find that many people seem to grab that very well. But it's, in my opinion, it's a very important distinction. You stop doing things for him because you can't do anything. How am I doing? How's the flesh doing? But rather to realize that when you walk in the Spirit, then you are now laying hold of the power of the Word of God made flesh in you and through you as through his Spirit, so that you manifest the fruit of the Spirit. So instead of those things that Jesus described in Mark chapter 7, all these deeds of unrighteousness that he listed, almost like a litany, instead now you manifest the Spirit-filled results of love, joy, and peace, and patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, because that's being manifested in you and through you. But the beauty is that it's being that fragrance of Christ is being mediated and expressed in a way through you that no one else ever can or ever will ever again. So it's a wonderful way of seeing it. So that's really the concept here. Let me see, we are almost out of time. These are good questions that you've raised. Can I, let me see. Um, um, do I do good things so that I feel consciously righteous, or how do I know I'm doing it for God? That's a great question. I think it comes down to this. It's a matter of loving him and serving him. And so instead of trying to do good things, it's to know the good person. It's to become, to know him and to become like him. It's a matter of identification with him. So the whole concept then is these three questions that I often put here. Let me get it for you here. It's these right there, these questions here. So what do you seek? This is what you do. If you are pursuing him and then pursuing him, if I seek to know him, then as I'm walking by the Spirit, and so the other way of looking at it is those three questions, but then I also look at these things. As I trust the Father, abide in the Son, walk by the Spirit. Insofar as you're doing that, or you can put it this way, walk by the Spirit. And abide in the Son, trust the Father, because it's the Spirit that draws us to the Son, who draws us to the Father. So in any event, when you're doing this, when you're walking in the Spirit, you're fulfilling the deeds of the law. And love is the fulfillment of the law. So it becomes possible for you to do that. So instead of trying to do it for him or trying to be conscious of it, you're doing it as a manifestation of loving him and allowing him to love people through you. So you become an artesian well of eternal life. You become a living epistle. You become a person who is manifesting the eternal. Insofar as you're walking by the Spirit, you're doing that. When we walk by the flesh, then there's a unique distortion, because just as we have a unique Spirit signature that makes us unique in the way we will reflect and refract the glory of God in a way no one else ever can or ever will. At the same time, it's obvious we also have thereby a unique flesh signature in which we uniquely distort him in those manners. So I've talked about my flesh signature and conform, but now I realize, no, we also have a unique Spirit signature, and that's manifested. But the thing about this is training yourself to continue to move in this, so that when you catch yourself being out of the Spirit, what you're focusing on now is a desire to be back with him. Because what do you seek? Do you want him more than anything else? If you do, then you are thank him for the grace of realization that you messed up. And instead of wallowing in that grief over that, you thank him for the grace of insight. You get up and you move. And the more you do that, you reduce the intervals between the two. So you spend more and more time in the spirit and less time in the flesh until after a while you're spring loaded toward the spirit. And then the flesh becomes much more and more a thing that is less a component of your life. But the flesh itself, however, can never be improved or removed. You'll have that until the judgment seat of Christ. But you can, though, diminish its power over you by basically not feeding it, not letting it atrophy, as it were. But it can pop back in a moment, as you know. And so when you catch the flesh doing that, when you're pulled in a temptation, immediately what you do is you do the spiritual judo of realizing that that's a temptation that you can now give back to God and give it and hold it up there until it's his again. And so that way you actually leverage it for good rather than for ill. I think we're out of time. We are. Enjoyed being with you. And let me just close you in a prayer. I have all these transforming prayers I like to use. And sometimes I add a new one here. But right, trying to find them. So I want to find one here that is particularly relevant for our purposes here. And it would be worshiping him in all things. So this is what we're going to close out on. And again, I'm inviting you to join us next Monday, where we're going to pick up on the next of those questions. You've called me to participate in your purposes through the work I have been given to do during my earthly sojourn. May I do my work with care and excellence in a desire to be pleasing to you. I realize that all things become spiritual when they are done in your name. May I honor you in my choices and activities and view the works of my hands as a mode of worship. I want whatever I do in thought, word, and deed to be honoring to you and edifying to others. I ask for a clearer sense of purpose and calling, and for the power to accomplish that for which you have placed me on this earth. Amen. It's good to be with you. God bless.